Hey, I'm Nico, and this episode of Licks of the Beast is a very special retrospective in celebration of the 40th anniversary of perhaps the single most important album in the history of Iron Maiden's career, the legendary Peace of Mind. The reason I consider this such an important album is that Peace of Mind was, in my estimation, when Iron Maiden really started to sound like Iron Maiden. The Number of the Beast was a pretty significant step forward from Killers, but the band still sounded like they were figuring out their musical identity, and the album had remnants of the previous album's stylistic characteristics. You could hear elements of Murders in the Rue Morgue and Invaders, and ideas carried over from Genghis Khan on Hallowed Be Thy Name, just to give two quick examples. Their style was really starting to take shape, but the fourth album is where all the elements would come together cohesively for the very first time. And this was due to a number of factors converging at just the right moment in their career. Peace of Mind was the third album with Martin Birch producing, which meant he had started to really get a feel for the band, what they were all about musically, and what was required to capture the overall sound for a given album's collection of songs. Dave and Adrian were now on their third album working together as well, and by this time, they'd found their voice as a twin guitar team, both in the way their parts complemented one another and in the way they played off each other in their distinct guitar solos. Bruce Dickinson was settling in as the band's voice and face, and on this album he also established himself as a strong songwriter. In fact, he co-wrote 3 of the album's 8 songs, including the lead single Flight of Icarus, and he wrote and composed by himself one of my absolute favorite Iron Maiden songs, Revelations. And of course, Steve Harris was evolving as a songwriter and composer at an incredible rate. As great as tracks like Phantom of the Opera and Hallowed Be Thy Name were, the complexity and creativity of the arrangement of the album's closer to Tame is a glow-up of epic proportions. Peace of Mind is the album where Steve's songs really started to evoke their subject matter in the music as he began developing a more of a cinematic approach to the songwriting. But there was one final piece of the puzzle that came with this album that really nailed down that classic Iron Maiden sound, and that was the arrival of the larger-than-life Nicko McBrain to replace Clive Burr on drums. Now, I will never downplay the greatness of Clive, as he was a phenomenal drummer and a fundamental part of the band's early success. But Nicko's fluidity and versatility made it possible to achieve that loose but tight feel and that seamlessness in the changes that are key elements of Iron Maiden's unique brand of heavy metal. The album was recorded at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, which was also the place where Power Slave and Somewhere in Time would be recorded, as well as The Final Frontier over 20 years later. Now, I don't know what it was about that place, but there was some serious magic that came out of those sessions. The sound of the album is a huge leap forward from The Number of the Beast, which is crazy when you consider it was released only 1 year later. And don't get me wrong, Beast was a pretty good sounding album, especially for 1982, but in comparison, Peace of Mind sounds considerably bigger, fuller, and more polished. So with all that having been said, let's take a brief look at the 8 songs that make up this historical record, starting with the opening track, Where Eagles There. The album starts with a really instantly recognizable drum roll by Nicko, leading to one of the most powerful riffs on any Iron Maiden album. This is already much different from anything they'd done before. Instead of the bounce and swing feel that was so present on their 3 previous albums, here we get a very grounded, driving riff that feels heavier, and it creates an image in your mind so you can really visualize what the song is about. Dave Murray's solo is a great example of playing for the song and not for the guitarist's ego. Dave had been playing some pretty wild solos up until that point, so his fluidity and technical ability were quite evident. But on this song, he chose to play a series of just natural harmonics, dive bombs, and trills because that is what best fit the mood of the instrumental section, which really feels like a movie soundtrack in a way. Revelations is the first song written by Bruce Dickinson to appear on an Iron Maiden album, and it's just a brilliant little epic. The composition, arrangement, theme, lyrics, and performance by Bruce and the band are absolutely top level. What's interesting about this song, and this applies to a multitude of Iron Maiden songs really, is that although the arrangement has a fair bit of complexity and it almost feels like an album deep cut, it works magnificently well live. In fact, this was one of my personal highlights of the Live After Death home video back in the day, and it was a highlight of last year's Legacy of the Beast performances as well. The clean verse section is beautiful in its simplicity, with the guitar playing the arpeggiated triads A minor over E, F suspended second, C major, and G major. Meanwhile, the bass plays a fantastic line that highlights the root notes of the guitar chords, while simultaneously adding a really catchy and very memorable melody. The interplay between bass and drums in this section is well worth highlighting, as it was an early indicator of how well Nickel McBrain and Steve Harris would go on to work together over the next 4 decades. And Bruce Dickinson's vocal melodies and performance are just absolutely breathtaking. This song also features a beautiful guitar harmony over that clean section just after the intro. Flight of Icarus was the first of many Adrian Smith-penned album singles and a longtime fan favorite. It really showcases Adrian's prowess as a songwriter, and it's not based on guitar riffs but on hooks, melody, and the tension and release principle. This song's deliberate rhythm gives it hypnotic quality, especially because every section starts on the tonic with no key changes or modulations. The verses have very little guitar, and the E and F sharp power chords are allowed to ring out only to provide a frame for the vocal melody to stand out. The song also features 2 excellent guitar solos by Dave and Adrian that complement one another and showcase their individual playing styles perfectly. You have Murray's fluid legato lines and Smith's choppy, structured phrasing and singable melodic motifs. Die With Your Boots On is a great song about rising above challenges and living life to the fullest. This one has 2 really great harmonies: the intro riff, which is harmonized strictly in thirds, and the bridge harmony, which uses wider intervals, 11ths and 12ths. It's a great example of how different harmonic intervals can be used to achieve a specific effect. The intro riff in thirds sounds tighter and a little bit more closed, while the bridge harmony sounds broader, almost like a section of a movie score. The Trooper is, of course, one of Iron Maiden's most well-known songs, and every part of it is instantly recognizable. You have the signature intro and outro riff that bookends the song. The main harmony riff with its unique sounding trills and the gallop rhythm throughout. The first half of the first verse framed with the call and response chord stops and that powerful opening line, "You'll take my life, but I'll take yours too."
You'll take my life, but I'll take yours too. You fire musket, but I'll run you through. So when you're waiting for the next attack, you better stand, there's no turning back. The bill was so
the very singable chorus over the ringing D and E chords, and two extremely memorable and iconic guitar solos by Adrian and Dave. Every lick in both solos is a must-know for metal guitarists, and these are some of the most widely covered guitar solos in heavy metal history. What is really exceptional about these solos is the pacing. There's a push-pull dynamic in both solos that keeps the listener engaged lick after lick. Still Life is next. And from the haunting intro to the final words, "Now we rest in peace," this song is very emotionally charged. Lyrically, it tells the story about someone who sees spirits calling to him in a lake and ultimately takes his lover to see the source of his obsession, ultimately jumping into the lake with her, causing both to perish. Musically, we follow the protagonist through his changing emotional states. First with the dreamy, haunting intro with its percussive arpeggio that almost sounds like the ticking of time, and Dave Murray's beautiful, slow, and deliberate solo. Then the way the entire band comes in on the ringing C chord that highlights the protagonist's state of elation, and the call and response chorus sounds intense and somewhat euphoric. This is reinforced with the use of the Dorian mode in the guitar's response phrases. The raised sixth of the Dorian mode, in contrast to the flat sixth of the Aeolian mode that characterizes the rest of the song, really brings up the tension and intensity. That takes us to Quest for Fire. The staccato intro and outro bookend riff is yet another cinematic moment of this album. It's so simple, but it feels so incredibly epic, and it sounds huge. The guitars and bass in the verses have a very unique rhythmic pattern that sounds like it may have started off as a gallop rhythm, but later changed to something a little bit more laid back and more interesting. Instead of the more typical 4/4 time, we're in 12/8, which subdivides the 4 downbeats into a triplet feel, and there's a gallop within those triplets. Another interesting part in this song is the instrumental interlude. So in the first half, Adrian is following the bass line and Dave is playing a similar melody a third higher that is slightly different in the tail end. In the second half, the guitars continue as they were, but the bass breaks away and starts to play just root and octave chords, outlining the melody so that the whole section opens up just before the guitar solos. This again is a clever bit of arranging that seems so obvious once it's done, and it's part of the song we're all familiar with, but it's actually the kind of thing that requires vision and an understanding of song crafting as an art form to apply. Sun and Steel is probably one of their lesser known and not often talked about deep cuts. And that's really unfortunate because it's actually quite a good song with some fantastic singing by Bruce, and I love the vocal harmony in the chorus. The instrumental section features a very interesting guitar harmony that really captures the spirit of that entire album, and early 80s metal in general, I would say. The album ends with To Tame a Land. This is the album's pièce de résistance and an exceptionally strong closer to a phenomenal collection of songs. It is of course about the Frank Herbert novel Dune, and for those of you who don't know this story, they originally wanted to call the song Dune, but when they asked Frank Herbert for permission, he refused in a very strong way and literally told them he hated bands like Iron Maiden and that if they'd call the song Dune, he'd sue them. Frank Herbert. Incredible novelist, but what a dick. So this is the third song on the album to have a bookend intro-outro, and once again, its effect is uniquely cinematic and picturesque. The interesting thing about this intro is how it casually moves from the key of B minor to C minor for just 4 bars, and then back to B minor just to add tension and keep the melody interesting. This is a rather uncommon move, and it's incredible how they do it unpretentiously, like it's the most ordinary thing. The song then picks up suddenly with the bass playing the main melody and the guitars just playing the outlining chords with a chugging type of rhythm. Again, this is an unusual move for a heavy metal song. This continues even throughout the first interlude where the bass plays the melody that will be doubled by the vocal line and the guitars play just the implied chords. This is a technique they would repeat on the following album on the song Rime of the Ancient Mariner. To Tame a Land comes to a climax in a fantastic harmonized melody that they move from the key of F sharp minor to E minor to D minor and back. This movement almost gives the listener the illusion of being transported across space and time. And I have to give props to Bruce Dickinson for not only managing to sing a melody with the words "He is the Kwisatz Haderach, he is born of Caladan and will take the Gom Jabbar," but also making it sound like the most powerful thing. That is the stuff of legends, my friends. When I first started becoming obsessed with Iron Maiden's music, I always found Peace of Mind was the most mystical sounding album. Like it held some sort of arcane knowledge or something. And I guess it was a combination of things, from the guitar sounds, the heaviness of the riffs, the particular songwriting, and of course the incredible album artwork. From the cover design to the band photo of them seated at this magnificent dining room table in what seems to be like an old mansion or a castle. For a teenager back in the 1980s, this was as awesome as it could possibly get. I really hope you enjoyed this 40-year retrospective on such a defining album for Iron Maiden. I'd love to read all about your first experiences with Peace of Mind and your favorite moments, so please share your thoughts in the comments section. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and do stay tuned for a lot more licks of the beast.